I take a deep breath as I step outside into the crisp evening air, the two dogs bounding ahead of me in excitement. It's become a routine now, taking our beloved pets out to their kennels so they can have some time to run and play, to feel the freedom of the outdoors. These are not small dogs by any means. One is a sturdy black lab husky mix, and the other a full-blooded Staffordshire Terrier, or pit bull. The kennels are positioned at the edge of our yard, right near the woods. These woods are immense, an expansive stretch of towering trees and dense underbrush that would take an entire day to hike through. But lately, when the sun dips below the horizon and darkness begins to settle, the dogs seem on edge. Their usual excitement is replaced with unease, and they bark and whine toward the house, pleading to come inside. Initially, I brushed it off as them wanting to return to the warmth of our home, but as the nights passed, I began to suspect they were genuinely afraid of something lurking in those woods. It was 3 nights ago when things took a disturbing turn. The evening had settled in and darkness was beginning to fall. Although we have a security light that prevents it from becoming pitch black, I approached the first kennel expecting the usual cacophony of barks and whines from our eager dogs. But this time, as I reached the front of the kennel, both of them were eerily silent. My heart started to race, a shiver running down my spine. They never hesitated to greet me enthusiastically, but now they stood there as still as statues. It sent a chill through me, an uneasiness in the air that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was like an electric tension, as if I were about to be jolted by something unknown. The unease only deepened the longer I stood there. I reached for the first dog, the lab, and that's when it happened. A heavy snap, like a branch breaking, echoed from the woods nearby. I froze. The dogs froze, and by that point I was so on edge that even a whisper would have made me jump, scream, and possibly run for my life. The air grew thick with eerie tension. The lab had her bushy tail tucked tightly underneath her, whining softly. It sent shivers down my spine. The pit bull, on the other hand, had moved as far away from the woods as she could, whimpering for me to come and rescue her. I could only take one dog in at a time. They got too excited and sometimes fought, so I had to leave the pit bull behind, trembling in fear. I felt guilty as I walked away, her high-pitched whining bark haunting my ears. It was a sound I had never heard her make before. The lab couldn't get to the safety of the house fast enough. I rushed back for the pit bull, my dread growing with each step. Her kennel was positioned right at the edge of the woods, and I had to turn my back to open her door. As I approached, the air turned heavy and stale, carrying with it an unpleasant smell, like that of a dead skunk. Another snap, closer this time, and I was ready to bolt. But I couldn't abandon my dog, who was now facing the woods defensively. It was as if I were walking through water, every step a battle against my fear. I reached the door, and as I got my dog out, she too was scared and began growling behind me. I was paralyzed in place, my heart pounding in my chest when I heard it, heavy breathing right behind me. My senses were on high alert, and I could barely think. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity before I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. At that moment, terror engulfed me, and without looking back, we both took off running. A bone-chilling scream emanated from the base of the woods, sending another wave of shivers down my spine. I didn't dare glance over my shoulder. I just ran. My pit bull pulled me desperately toward the house. Once inside, I turned off all the lights and stared out the window at the woods. I could see something moving just out of my line of sight. It swayed back and forth 5 times, then vanished. It took me hours to fall asleep that night, every little noise in the darkness sending my heart racing. The following evening, I decided to take the dogs in earlier, right around dusk. I hoped it would be uneventful. But as I was getting my pit bull out of her kennel, a deafening snap echoed through the woods as a tree branch snapped in half. It sounded distant, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I hurriedly got my dog and began walking toward the house. Just a few steps from the kennel, I heard something massive charging toward me from within the woods. Panic surged through me as we ran, and it felt like whatever it was followed us for a while before retreating. Since that night, every evening has brought strange sounds from the woods, branches breaking, things being thrown around, knocking on trees, and eerie roars. I'm terrified, and I no longer take my dogs down there. We go for walks during the day, and I ensure we're all safely inside before dusk falls. I'm at a loss for what to do, but I'm seriously considering buying a gun, though I'm unsure if it will offer any real protection from whatever lurks in those dark, foreboding woods.
Can you tell me what time you are listening to this video? How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you guys.
The mountains called to me, a siren song that resonated deep in my bones. After months cooped up due to the pandemic, with a newborn daughter cradled in our arms, my wife and I had scarcely caught a wink of sleep, let alone dreamed of escape. So, when the opportunity came to join my brothers-in-law and my father-in-law for a camping trip in the high Utah mountains, I leaped at it like a trout to a fly. We drove in convoy, my newly acquired Toyota Land Cruiser leading the way, its engine purring with the promise of adventure. The vehicle was secondhand, but to me, it was a chariot to freedom. I'd thrown in my new hammock too, eager to test it against the wilderness. The place we were headed to was a family secret, a spot so remote it took us 2.5 hours from our home in the valley. I promised not to disclose its location, and I intend to keep that promise. As we navigated the winding roads, the urban landscape gave way to an expanse of wilderness, untouched and raw. Arriving at the campsite, a sense of peace washed over me. We were surrounded by mature pine trees and aspens, standing tall and stoic. The air was cool, a welcome respite from the summer heat hovering around 65 degrees. There was still runoff from the melting snow, and the mud it created didn't bother me. It was a mark of authenticity on my Land Cruiser. I decided to set up my hammock high between the top of my Toyota and an adjacent sturdy pine tree. Climbing onto the vehicle to reach my lofty bed, I felt a childlike thrill. I liked my hammock high, even though it often slid down the tree, leaving me to wake up with my back brushing against the cold, dew-laden earth. Once my hammock was secured and insulated against the night's chill, I moved on to help with the fire. I've always had a knack for starting fires, and this time was no different. In no time, we had a crackling fire around which we roasted hot dogs and shared stories, the kind that only seem to surface around a campfire. However, the night took an unexpected turn. My father-in-law, a tough old bird who'd probably chopped more wood than Paul Bunyan, managed to injure himself with the axe. He insisted on driving back to town for stitches, leaving us to wonder if he would return. Despite this setback, we enjoyed the night, the full moon casting a surreal glow over our camp, transforming the woods into a silver-tinted wonderland. It was the kind of night I'd longed for during those endless days and nights of lockdown, a return to something primal and deeply satisfying. Little did I know, as I settled into my hammock high above the ground, that the night held more in store for us than just moonlit tranquility. The night grew deeper, the moon hanging like a sentinel over the serene wilderness. Our campfire had simmered down to a bed of glowing embers, casting a soft, warm light. The tranquility was deceptive, as I would soon find out. Lying in my hammock, suspended between the Land Cruiser and a towering pine, I gazed up at the star-strewn sky. It was moments like these that made me forget the chaos of the world, the constant buzz of news about the pandemic, the cries of my newborn in the early hours. Here, under the vast canopy of the universe, those troubles seemed trivial. Our peace was first interrupted by an unexpected visitor. The crunch of gravel under tires heralded the arrival of a park ranger in a white Silverado. His approach was friendly but tinged with concern. He asked if we had seen anyone else around, explaining that a camp a couple of miles away had reported a homeless man rummaging through their stuff and causing a ruckus. The ranger was out looking for him, worried the man might be lost or hurt in the rugged terrain. We assured him we hadn't seen anyone and would keep an eye out. His departure left a subtle unease in the air. The presence of my 45 to 70 lever-action rifle in the Land Cruiser offered some comfort. I'd faced down the wildlife of these mountains before, a charging bull moose and a curious bear among others. I felt prepared for anything. Or so I thought. Back in my hammock, the cool mountain air and the gentle sway lulled me into a light sleep. That's when the first pine cone hit me. I woke with a start, brushing it off as a natural occurrence, but a niggling suspicion crept into my mind. I tried to dismiss it, closing my eyes once more, only to be jolted awake by a second pine cone, this time striking my back with more force. I sat up, irritation mingling with confusion. My first thought was a prank by my brothers-in-law, but a quick glance revealed them both sound asleep in their hammocks. I strained my eyes, peering into the darkness beyond our camp. The full moon cast long, dancing shadows, but I couldn't see anyone. The ranger's warning echoed in my mind, amplifying my unease. Feeling foolish yet unable to shake the sensation of being watched, I decided to retrieve my rifle. As I clambered out of the hammock and into the Land Cruiser, I felt a twinge of worry for my father-in-law. He hadn't returned, and the possibilities of what might have befallen him nagged at me. I considered waking my brothers-in-law, but decided against it. There was no need to alarm them without cause. Back in my hammock, rifle by my side, I tried to find sleep again, but every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. The wilderness, once a place of solace, now felt like a realm of unknown threats. I resolved then, as I lay awake, vigilant and tense, that next time I would bring a tent. It seemed a flimsy protection against the unknown, but it was better than hanging exposed between two trees, a target for whatever lurked in the moonlit woods. As the night wore on, every shadow seemed to take on a life of its own, every sound a sinister whisper. The mountains I had always known as a haven now felt like a labyrinth of unknown dangers. My mind raced with thoughts of the homeless man the ranger had mentioned, and I clutched my rifle like a lifeline. The return of my father-in-law broke the tense silence of the night. His Jeep Cherokee's headlights pierced the darkness, and the familiar sound of its engine was a welcome relief. He parked and approached my hammock, his face etched with something I couldn't quite place. Was it fear? He told me in hushed tones of his strange encounter. As he had driven up, he'd seen what he thought was a man in a ghillie suit skulking near our camp. At first, he thought it was me playing one of my usual pranks, but as he got closer, he realized it was someone else, or something else. The figure had vanished into the woods as quickly as it had appeared. His story sent a chill down my spine. I thought about the pine cones, the odd noises in the night, and the ranger's warning. Was it the homeless man? Or was it something more sinister, something beyond our understanding? The mountains are full of legends. Stories of Bigfoot and other mysterious creatures. Were they just tales, or was there a sliver of truth in them? We stayed up the rest of the night, our eyes scanning the darkness, our ears straining for any sound out of the ordinary. The rifle lay across my lap, more a comfort than a weapon. Despite the fear, we made it through the night unscathed. As dawn broke, we packed up our camp in silence, the events of the night hanging over us like a heavy fog. We stopped at the ranger station to report our encounter. The same ranger was there, wrapping up his shift. We told him about the figure in the ghillie suit, and I couldn't help but mention my half-formed theory about Bigfoot. The color drained from the ranger's face at the mention. His reaction was odd, almost fearful. It was just a homeless person, I thought, but his reaction made me second-guess myself. Maybe there was more to the legends than I had allowed myself to believe. I kept my theories to myself as we drove back home. My father-in-law had always been a skeptic, dismissing tales of Bigfoot as nonsense. I didn't want to add to the strain of the night with wild speculations. The mountains had always been my escape, a place of peace and solitude. But after that night, they felt different. There was a mystery hidden in the depths of those woods, a story untold. And though part of me longed to uncover it, another part wished to leave it undisturbed. A secret preserved in the wild heart of the Utah mountains. My name is Charles, and I'm from Minnesota. I stumbled upon your YouTube channel at the beginning of this year. I'm a retired forest ranger, having spent the better part of 3 decades working for the U.S. Forest Service's Law Enforcement and Investigations Division. Since my retirement, I've had plenty of time on my hands. And over the past few months, I've spent a lot of that time listening to various anthologies that you've published. I think it's awesome that you publish the stories of regular folks like me. So, with that in mind, I think I have a story that you might be interested in. It seems a little strange that I'm so excited to tell you about this, as it's not exactly the kind of thing most people want to hear. I used to wonder how you get so many people wanting to share their bad memories with you. But after having thought about it for a while, I think I've figured it out. These aren't the kinds of things we can talk about around the dinner table in polite company. I've never had a single person ask me in the flesh, what was the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? People don't want to know, at least not the kind of people I've ever associated with. But at the same time, these are things that for whatever reason, we want to share with people. And much like your channel's viewers, I'm pretty apt to lend my ear to a story that's a little darker. So without further rambling, this is the story of one of the truly terrifying moments in my time as a forest ranger. For the vast majority of my career, I was posted in Voyageurs National Park, up near the Canadian border. Since the park is split in two by a series of lakes, it's popular with fishermen and kayakers. But these lakes are also populated by many small islands, many of which are popular camping spots. People come up to the VNP to get away from the city and get some privacy, and it doesn't get much more private than your own personal island, does it? Well, one afternoon, I got a call from a chief ranger asking me to do him a little favor. He had gotten a call from the International Falls Police Department, a small border city about 20 miles to the west, after an officer over there had received a missing persons report. Some lady's husband had gone on a camping trip with an old friend and had failed to return after being due back that morning. My job was to head over to their regular camping spot on a place called Wolf Island to see if they'd moved on or not. The ranger team at VNP is probably one of the most amphibious in the country, definitely the most waterborne in the region. Half of our job consists of policing the waterways and making sure all fishing and boating is within regulation. So not only do we have ready access to kayaks and motorboats, but we're very comfortable operating them. When I got the call, I headed to the Ash River Visitor Center, which was where we docked our boats. But just as I was prepping the boat to sail over to Wolf Island, I got a second call from the chief. The IFPD had reached out with an update, one I needed to be informed of immediately. According to the chief, this wasn't just a case of 2 fishermen having overslept after too many Miller Lights. The missing man's son had been in touch, and this time it was to warn law enforcement that not only was his father most likely armed, but he had been acting extremely erratically prior to departing for the camping trip. This was not what I'd been hoping to hear when I was told there was an update, but I was more than equipped to deal with the situation, seeing as I was on the law enforcement side of things as opposed to working solely at the visitor center. I had pretty much all the same options as your average police officer, but that didn't mean I wasn't feeling a sense of apprehension regarding what I might run up against. 9 times out of 10, incidents in the park are resolved quickly and peacefully. But, as you can probably guess, it's that 1 in 10 that keeps you up at night. After prepping the boat, I sailed west for around 20 to 25 minutes until I spotted Wolf Island. After using my binoculars to observe the island from a safe distance, I could make out a slight plume of smoke coming from its eastern side. I could have really done with some kind of bullhorn to call out to the missing camper, but I didn't have the good sense to bring one. So I was forced to bring my boat right up to within about 20 or 30 feet of the shore before calling out using nothing but my lung power. I called out once, then twice, and after the third call received no response, I decided to make landfall in order to get a visual on the campfire, which presumably had been started by our missing camper. I brought the boat up a little closer, hopped overboard, then waded my way ashore, calling out to our missing camper all the while. I could smell the campfire by that point, along with whatever was cooking on it, so I was doubtless within earshot of whoever had been tending to it. But since no one called back, and since I didn't see anyone as I walked up the beach, I figured whoever had made camp had moved on. Yet, as I walked further onto the island in search of the source of the smoke, something caught my eye. For as long as I live, I'll remember this in photographic detail. It runs in my head on its own sometimes, like someone pressed play on a remote control in my brain. I saw something falling out of the corner of my eye, and when I looked, I saw it was a raven landing to join some of its brothers and sisters. But then I saw what it was landing on. There was a man sitting in a camping chair, not quite upright, but not all the way slouched either, with a big old hole in the upper rear portion of his skull. One of the ravens was pushing its beak into the hole, while a few others fought over whatever had leaked onto the ground. The body accounted for one of our missing campers, but I didn't have to wait long to find the second. Lying motionless next to the campfire was what remained of the second missing camper. Someone had made the effort to cut off his legs, I'm guessing after he was deceased, and had worked on cutting them into small sections before placing them onto the fire. What I had been smelling on the way in hadn't been the camper's late lunch. It had been a section of the second camper's leg, sizzling away on the dying embers. I guess the guy in the chair hadn't the heart to finish disposing of his camping buddy, and had decided to let nature take its course on both of them. We never did find out why it happened, but we did figure out how. The killer had invited his friend on a camping trip to their regular spot. He hadn't hidden anything from his wife or anyone else for that matter, which led us to believe that his decision to kill his camping buddy was either a spontaneous one or that he had planned to simply kill him before taking his own life as a way of avoiding any consequences. He obviously wanted to conceal what he'd done. At least at one point, we believed he had. But then, this is where another argument for the spontaneous murder theory comes into play. Personally, I don't believe that he'd taken the time to research just how arduous the disposal of a dead body can be. There was no accelerant at the scene, so I don't think he'd planned to burn his friend's body. And when it became obvious that it was going to take way longer than he thought, and that law enforcement might well come looking for him or his dead friend before the disposal could be completed, I think he decided to just check out then and there. There was a somber mood among the park staff for a while after that. As far as I knew, nothing like that had ever happened before, and nothing like it happened again for the remainder of my career. As you can probably guess, national parks aren't exactly high crime areas, and at the VNP, the most intense things generally get is catching up to a speeding boating party, so you can tell them to slow down. So to have something so terrible happen right under our noses had a real strong effect on our mood during the weeks that followed. Sometimes I think about what happened in that guy's head to make him want to murder one of his best friends. Like I said, we didn't hear about any affairs or betrayals or anything else that might cause a man to temporarily go crazy. It's all just one big mystery. And like so many other of life's mysteries, I think I'm a lot more comfortable living in blissful ignorance. I've always been drawn to the calm and beauty of the great outdoors, so I decided to become a park ranger in a small rural state park known as Croft State Park. Nestled deep in the heart of the dense forest, the park was a haven for hikers and nature enthusiasts alike. But little did I know, it was also a haven for something much darker and more sinister. I had heard the rumors about Croft State Park long before I accepted the job. People talked of strange occurrences, eerie voices in the wind, and shadowy figures that wandered through most of the night. Most dismissed it as superstitious nonsense, but I couldn't help being intrigued by the stories. I figured it was probably all just local legend, and I was determined to prove the skeptics wrong. My first few weeks as a park ranger were actually quite peaceful. I spent my days patrolling the serene trails and ensuring the safety of visitors. The park seemed like any other, with the rustling leaves and the chirping of birds providing a soothing backdrop to my working environment. But as the days turned into weeks and summer transitioned into fall, I began noticing oddities I couldn't quite explain. One chilly evening, I was finishing my rounds when I heard it for the first time, a soft, haunting whisper carried on the breeze, just barely audible over the sound of my footsteps. I stopped dead in my tracks, trying to make out the words. The voice sounded distant and mournful, as if it were calling out to me from the shadows. My heart raced as I scanned the darkening forest, but no one was in sight. I brushed off the experience as a trick of the wind, but the whispers continued to haunt my nights in the park. I heard them when I was alone in my cabin, their ethereal tones seeping through the wooden walls. They echoed through the trees as I walked the trails, making me feel like I was being watched at every moment. The park that had once felt like my home now seemed like a foreign, foreboding place. As the whispers grew louder, other strange occurrences began to take place. I stumbled upon ancient, weathered totems and symbols etched into trees. They seemed to have no rhyme or reason, but their presence sent shivers down my spine. The wildlife, once abundant, started to slowly disappear, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The park's beauty had turned into a nightmarish landscape. One moonless night, as I patrolled the park alone, the atmosphere grew thick with an oppressive darkness. I knew I wasn't alone, and the fear gnawing at me for weeks finally erupted. I could hear footsteps that weren't mine, rustling leaves that couldn't be attributed to the wind, and the chilling laughter of children echoing through the trees. But when I shone my flashlight into the dense undergrowth, no one was ever there. Dread settled in as I realized that the stories of Croft State Park were not just tales, but a living nightmare. It was as if the forest had come alive, and evil forces intent on driving me away were tormenting me. But I was a park ranger, dedicated to my duty, and I couldn't abandon my post. I began researching the park's history, searching for clues about its dark past. That's when I stumbled upon an old dusty journal hidden in the back of the ranger station. It was a diary that belonged to a former park ranger, and its entries chronicled a descent into madness. The ranger wrote of the whispers, the symbols, and the strange figures that had tormented him until he disappeared without a trace. Terrified by what I had read, I knew I had to confront whatever dark presence dwelled within Croft State Park. Armed with knowledge from the journal, I ventured deeper into the park, following the whispers to a long-forgotten clearing. There, I found a circle of weathered stones, their surfaces etched with symbols that matched those I had discovered on the trees. As I stood in the circle's center, the whispers grew more insistent. The shadows around me seemed to take form, merging into a group of ghostly children. They giggled and sang songs from a bygone era, their voices filled with otherworldly sorrow. I knew I had to do something to break the curse that had plagued Croft State Park for centuries. With trembling hands, I recited the words from the journal, calling upon the spirits to release their hold on the park. The children's laughter turned to cries, and the symbols on the stones began to glow with an eerie light. The ground trembled, and the forest came alive with a furious wind. In a blinding flash, the spirits were gone, and Croft State Park fell silent. The whispers faded, and the symbols on the trees vanished, leaving the park in an eerie calm. I knew that I had done something. I don't know if it was exactly what needed to be done, but that experience took a toll on me. I don't know how much of it was hallucination from being overly tired, or just from being incredibly anxious, but I do know that it was not my imagination. Croft State Park was a place of beauty and serenity to me, but it had been forever changed in my eyes. I had confronted the darkness that lurked within, and I had survived to tell the tale. But the memory of that night will forever haunt me. That state park will never leave my mind, my memory forever etched with a constant reminder of otherworldly forces that can exist, even in the calmest of places. I grew up in St. Louis, but I moved to Knoxville after enrolling at the University of Tennessee. During the summer between my freshman and sophomore years, I decided to sign up for a seasonal volunteer ranger program at the nearby Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My career aspirations leaned more towards sitting behind a desk, but the romanticized idea of being a park ranger had always fascinated me. Perhaps it was the allure of working outdoors, rescuing wounded animals, and becoming one with nature. So when the opportunity arose to play the part of a ranger for a month while donning my very own campaign hat, I couldn't resist. For 7 long months, I eagerly looked forward to this adventure. However, my initial enthusiasm was met with a dose of reality. The seasonal volunteer program primarily served as a way to secure vacation time for the understaffed ranger teams. We were never entrusted with tasks that required real experience or expertise. Most of the time, the other 2 volunteers and I found ourselves staffing the park's visitor center. The remaining 40% of the time, we were assigned basic administrative work, or boundary maintenance. Although it wasn't the exhilarating experience I had envisioned, I preferred the boundary maintenance tasks over being cooped up indoors. Boundary maintenance was essentially a fancy term for fence checking. My responsibilities involved walking long sections of boundary fence to ensure they were in good repair. It was during one of these hikes that I encountered someone I would never forget, even after all these years. I was near Cosby Creek, located on the eastern boundary of the park, an area of particular importance during boundary checks due to an old graveyard called Tritt Cemetery. We needed to ensure that wildlife didn't disturb the resting place of the deceased. After confirming the fences around the cemetery were intact, I continued eastward along the fence line for about 10 to 15 minutes. Suddenly, I spotted movement ahead through the trees. The moment I laid eyes on the figure, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was as if my mind momentarily questioned the reality before me. The girl who moved softly through the trees was in a horrific state. She was completely naked, her skin marred with clotted blood and dried gore. Every inch of her body, from her hair down to her toes, was covered in blood. It was astonishing that she could even stand on her feet. Without hesitation, I rushed into action. I approached her as she collapsed into the dirt, removed my shirt, and used it to cover her as best I could. Gently, I picked her up and carried her back to my truck. Thankfully, I had found her not far from where I had parked. Exhausted by the time we reached the truck, I remembered that there was an urgent care center in Newport, about 12 miles north of Cosby. I drove as fast as I could with the girl in the back seat, repeating, "Don't close your eyes. You have to stay awake." She kept her eyes wide open but remained silent, staring at nothing, until we finally arrived at the urgent care center. The medical staff immediately attended to her, and I explained the situation. It was there that my role in this ordeal ended. They informed me that the girl would be transferred to Sevierville, where a hospital with a dedicated emergency room was located. I offered to help further, but they advised me that the best course of action was to return to the chief ranger and inform him of the situation. When I walked into Ranger HQ, covered in blood, the chief and my coworkers immediately sensed that something terrible had occurred. At first, they thought I was the one who had been hurt, but I assured them it's not my blood. I recounted the events, and the chief took notes. Since we had jurisdiction, the responsibility to investigate what had happened to the girl fell on us. The only other entity that could legally take over would be the FBI, either if we requested their assistance or if they decided to intervene. Our team prepared to investigate, but that's when things took a strange turn. We needed to speak with the girl to understand what had happened. But when the chief contacted the hospital and spoke with the doctors, we learned that she hadn't uttered a word since her arrival. She wouldn't speak to the doctors, the nurses, or anyone else. This wasn't entirely surprising, considering the trauma she must have endured, but it complicated our efforts. The doctors advised us to check back the next day, hoping she might open up then. We waited until early afternoon the following day and called the hospital again. However, to our dismay, the girl still refused to speak. The chief decided to visit the hospital, and he asked me to accompany him, hoping that my presence might encourage her to talk. We discussed the investigation during the drive, unaware of the bizarre turn it was about to take. When we arrived, we found the nursing staff in a state of panic. It took a while to figure out what had happened, but when we did, we were shocked beyond belief. The hospital had lost our victim. Surveillance camera footage revealed a man dressed in hospital scrubs pushing a wheelchair through the hospital's main entrance just after 1:15 p.m. He wore some sort of ID clip and managed to bypass the reception desk, heading straight for the girl's room. He placed her in the wheelchair and wheeled her right out of the hospital without any interference from the staff. This was a massive breach of the hospital's protocols, but without any information about the girl or her apparent abductor, we had limited options. The only course of action was to involve the FBI, as we feared the person who had taken the girl might be connected to her initial predicament. We hoped this would lead to a full-fledged investigation. However, when we followed up with the FBI about a month later, we were met with disappointment. Someone higher up in the bureau had decided that the case wasn't worth pursuing. They weren't interested in allocating resources to a case where the primary charge might be impersonating a healthcare professional. It seemed that without hard evidence or the girl's testimony, the case had hit a dead end. I wasn't satisfied with this outcome. If it were up to me, I would have chased this case to the ends of the earth to find out what had happened to that poor girl. But it wasn't up to me. I wasn't even a full-fledged ranger at the time. When my volunteer stint ended, I went back to my studies, but I never forgot what I had witnessed. Years later, when the time felt right, I decided to share this unsettling story with my daughter. It might seem strange to share such a frightening and bizarre tale with a teenager, but I believe there was a lesson to be learned from it. When I drove back to Ranger HQ after leaving the girl at the urgent care center, I had assumed that the Ranger team and other law enforcement agencies would fight tirelessly to bring her attackers to justice. However, what I learned was that the world wasn't always as just and straightforward as I had once believed. Sometimes even those entrusted with our protection could act indifferently or apathetically. It was a harsh lesson to learn, but I wanted my daughter to understand that life could be unpredictable and that justice wasn't always guaranteed. Monsters might exist, but they come in various forms, and sometimes the pursuit of justice is fraught with obstacles and bureaucracy. As I shared this story with my daughter, I couldn't help but reflect on how the pursuit of justice had become a far cry from the image of the heroic lawman riding on a fast horse with a shiny badge. In the modern world, justice was more about paperwork, bureaucracy, and budgets. It was a sobering realization, but one that I hoped would prepare my daughter for the complexities of the world she would face.
I caught a man in a park ranger uniform who wasn't one of us. I've worked as a ranger in Olympic National Park for almost 8 years now. That place is beautiful in the kind of way that makes you forget how dangerous it can be. Towering evergreens, fog-thick valleys, rivers that sound like whispering voices if you're alone too long. It's the kind of terrain that feels ancient, like it's watching you more than you're watching it. Most of my job is boring stuff. Trail checks, radioing hikers who stayed out too late, dragging dumbasses out of restricted areas. But every once in a while, you get a call that doesn't sit right, the kind where your gut clenches before the radio even goes quiet. This started about a month ago, early spring. The trails were still slushy with snow melt, which meant fewer crowds. I was posted at the Hoh Rainforest Outpost, pretty remote. No cell reception, just a data-dakey ranger radio and the occasional flyover from search and rescue. I'd been on evening patrol heading toward the Blue Glacier Spur when I spotted someone ahead of me on the trail. He had the uniform: brown slacks, green jacket, wide-brimmed hat. From the back, everything looked legit, but the way he was standing, arms stiff at his sides, head tilted like he was listening too hard to something I couldn't hear. I called out, "Hey, you from the Fork station." I figured maybe they sent someone to assist with some storm damage we'd had earlier in the week. The guy didn't move, didn't even flinch. I walked closer, trying not to sound weird about it. "You good, man?" When I was maybe 20 feet away, he turned. I don't know how else to say it. Something was off about his face. Not wrong in an obvious way. He looked normal. Except, it was too normal, like someone trying to copy what a person should look like. His eyes didn't track right. He blinked too slow, like he was trying to remember when to do it. And his uniform, it looked about right, but the patches were sewn in the wrong places. Name tag was missing. His badge was plastic, not even the right font. I felt my stomach tighten. "You got ID?" I asked, keeping my tone calm but assertive. He stared at me, then smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. His lips moved like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. I instinctively reached for my radio. "This is Unit 11 at trail marker 22 near Glacier Point. I've got an unidentified individual in what looks like ranger gear. No ID. Unresponsive. Requesting backup or verification on visiting staff." There was a pause. Then the reply came, crackling through. "Copy that, Unit 11. There's no visiting personnel assigned to your sector today. Confirm again. Over." I looked up. The guy was gone. Just vanished. Like I blinked and he stepped behind a tree. Only there were no trees close enough to hide behind. The nearest thicket was across the trail, at least 15 feet away. And there was no sound, no crunch of leaves, no branches snapping, no breathing. I stood there, heart thudding in my ears, scanning every inch of the trail. The sun was almost gone by then, and the shadows were starting to get thick. I didn't see him again that night, but I didn't sleep much either. Every creak of the cabin floorboards, every gust of wind scraping the side of the outpost had me reaching for the rifle locked under my cot. The worst part? When I checked the log the next morning, someone had opened the supply shed, but it was still locked. From the inside. I told myself the lock thing was just a mistake. Maybe I'd left it ajar the night before, and the wind blew it open. Maybe someone else came by, someone with a key. I even asked around during the next radio check-in. Fork said no one had been sent out. Port Angeles said the same. Still, I filed an incident report just in case. The following few days were quiet. Cold mornings, foggy afternoons, standard maintenance patrols. But I kept thinking about that guy, the silent ranger, the fake badge, the plastic grin. I kept replaying that moment where he just wasn't there anymore. No noise, no movement. Like he had blinked out of existence. Then hikers started coming in with odd reports. A group of college kids from Spokane stopped by the station 2 days after my sighting. They were rattled. Nothing extreme, but definitely spooked. Said they'd seen a man standing in the tree line near the waterfall trail. Just standing, not moving. When they waved at him, he turned around and walked into the forest. No trail or anything, just disappeared between the trees. One of them, a girl in a puffy North Face jacket, said it felt like he wanted them to follow, like he was leading them somewhere. But something about him felt fake. Like it was a trick. That word hit me hard. I asked what he looked like. Same uniform, same wide-brimmed hat. Said he didn't speak, just stood there with this weird frozen expression, like he was waiting for something. After they left, I decided to hike that trail again myself. There's a spot along that path, not even a real marker, just a subtle shift in the dirt, like the trail splits for a few feet before merging back. Nobody ever takes the fork. It's a runoff route meant to divert rainwater in storms, not for hikers. But when I got to it, I stopped. There were footprints in the mud. Boot prints. Big ones. I crouched down to look. They matched our issue boots. Same tread, same shape. But the stride was weird. Too long, like the person had been walking stiff-legged or dragging one foot behind. I followed them maybe 30 yards off the path. The deeper I went, the quieter everything got. The kind of silence that makes your eardrums ring. Then I found the fire pit. It wasn't like a hiker's, No rocks, no structure, just scorched earth and half-burnt wood. Around it were bones, small ones, maybe rabbit or raccoon, but they were arranged in a circle, neatly placed, like some weird art project. In the center, blackened by soot, was a ranger hat, identical to mine. I radioed it in. Dispatch asked if I wanted backup. I said yes. An hour later, I was still waiting. That's when I heard someone whistling. No clear tune, just 3 rising notes, soft and slow, like a lullaby you only half remember from childhood. I spun around, rifle half raised. The whistling stopped. "Hello?" I called. Nothing. Just as I started backing away, I saw something sticking out of the underbrush. A scrap of cloth. I tugged it free. It was part of a ranger's shirt, torn, faded, caked in dried mud and something darker. The patch said M. Gilroy. I didn't recognize the name, but the uniform was ours. All right, stitching, font, everything correct, except that shirt wasn't from the current uniform design. It was discontinued 4 years ago. I took it with me. Back at the station, I searched the employee records. No Gilroy, past or present. I even asked the older rangers during the next supply drop. Nobody had heard of him. One guy, Charlie, got real quiet when he saw the shirt. Said it looked too familiar. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. I told him. He just nodded once, then said, "Keep your doors locked at night, even the shed." That night, I deadbolted everything. I double-checked the shed padlock and put a chair under the doorknob of the cabin. Then I went to bed with the rifle across my chest. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. Not a sound, a smell. It was faint but unmistakable, the acrid reek of burnt fabric and wet ash. I sat up slowly, my skin cold and tight. And there, at the edge of the window, was the silhouette of a man, wide-brimmed hat, shoulders too straight, unmoving. Watching me sleep. By the time I threw the door open, he was gone. But he'd left footprints on the inside of the window ledge. And the muddy ranger hat I'd taken from the fire pit? It was now sitting on my bed, dry, clean, and still warm. I didn't sleep for more than 10 minutes at a time. After that night, every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate. Every gust of wind scraping the side of the cabin sounded like someone dragging their fingers across wood, slow and patient. The next morning, I grabbed the hat, still resting exactly where I left it on the edge of the mattress, and shoved it into a plastic evidence bag. It still smelled like charred pine and sweat, even though it looked clean. I drove it down to the Forks Ranger Station. I didn't trust our outpost anymore. Told the supervisor, Rob Halgren, what had happened. Not everything. Not the footprints inside the window, not the frozen face I'd seen on the trail. Just the stuff I could back up. The old uniform, the fire pit, the unlogged person in full gear. He brushed it off as a local squatter, or maybe a disgruntled former employee. Said folks sometimes steal uniforms to get into restricted areas, spook tourists, or sell park gear on eBay. Told me to file a report with the Park Service and let the system work. But Rob didn't look me in the eyes while he said it. And as I was heading out the door, he muttered something. Soft, like he wasn't meant to say it aloud. "Should have stayed buried." I stopped. "What?" He just shook his head and waved me off like he was tired. "Nothing. Just watch your back." Okay, I took the long route back to my outpost that afternoon. Didn't want to be near the cabin before sunset. Figured I'd do a final sweep of the Southern Trail Loop, the one that curved toward the backcountry basin we call Devil's Throat. Locals avoid it. Old logging stories. Mostly missing workers, strange accidents, that kind of thing. About 2 miles in, I saw another set of footprints. Same tread, same long, awkward stride. They were recent, too, pressed into the mossy trail like the person had come through not more than an hour before me. But there was something else that chilled me. The prints doubled back on themselves. Whoever it was had walked in a wide circle multiple times, like they were pacing, or waiting. I followed them off the trail. About 100 yards in, the trees opened into a clearing I didn't recognize. Not on the map. Not on any terrain charts I'd ever seen. It was wrong. That's the best way I can say it. The space felt too quiet, too open, the way snow mutes sound after a storm, even though the air was dry. A boulder sat in the middle, black as obsidian. Fresh gouges clawed across it, like someone had taken a knife to the stone. And right there, leaning against the boulder, was another ranger shirt. This one was soaked in something. Not mud, not entirely blood either. It was thicker, darker, like oil with a copper tint. And next to it, a name badge. Metal, polished. M. Gilroy. Again, exactly the same as the one I found earlier. Only this time the badge was brand new. No scratches, no rust, like it had been printed yesterday. I started backing up slowly, and then I heard it. That whistling again. Same 3 notes. Soft, slow, but closer this time. Too close. I turned and caught just a glimpse of something moving behind a tree. Just enough to see that damn uniform. That wide-brimmed hat. His back was to me again, just like before. Rigid, still, arms tight against his sides. Then he stepped sideways without turning and disappeared behind a tree he couldn't have fit behind. I froze. He hadn't walked. He hadn't even shifted. It was like someone dragging a cutout across a piece of paper. Smooth, soundless. The radio on my belt cracked to life. Unit 11, you there? We just got a distress ping off your GPS. You good? I fumbled for it. Dispatch, I need backup now. I'm near marker 42, just past Devil's Throat. I found clothing from an unconfirmed ranger ID. Possible impersonator. Extremely dangerous. He's stalking the trails. Repeat, this guy is not one of us. There was silence. Then static. Then, return to the station, Unit 11. Do not pursue. Do not engage. Lock everything. Await instruction. The voice didn't sound like dispatch. Too flat. No call sign. No repeat back. Just that one cold message. And then I heard the click. Not from the radio, from behind me. I turned around. There was a camera nailed into the tree nearest to me. One of ours. Trail cam. Motion triggered, but it wasn't pointed at wildlife paths. It was angled down at me. The lens was still moving, still adjusting. Someone had just remotely accessed it. There weren't supposed to be any cameras this far out. I yanked the battery pack out and crushed the SD card under my boot. I didn't even think. Just reacted. Then I ran. Not jogged. Ran. All the way back to my outpost, lungs burning, legs cramping, ears straining for footsteps that never came. When I got back, I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. That was when I saw it. The muddy ranger hat. It was back on my bed. This time it was wet, dripping, and carved into the brim like with a blade were the words, "Gilroy lives here now." I didn't move for hours. I sat there on the edge of the cot with my back against the wall, rifle on my lap, and just watched the hat. Watched it drip, a slow, rhythmic plink, plink, plink onto the plywood floor. The water was dark, stained with something thick and red, like someone had steeped rust in a bucket for a week. I didn't dare touch it again. By sunrise, I was shaking. It was the kind of cold that gets into your bones. But I knew it wasn't the temperature. I was still soaked in sweat, shirt clinging to my back, teeth clenched so tight my jaw ached. I called in sick that morning, said I wasn't feeling right. Might have caught something. They said, fine, rest up. But no one offered to swing by. No one asked questions. That afternoon, I packed up a bag and drove down to Port Angeles to crash at a cheap roadside motel. Place was called the Whispering Cedars. One of those no-frills joints with flickering neon and curtains that don't quite close all the way. I needed noise, cars, civilization, something with walls that weren't made of pine. I didn't sleep much there either, because that night, someone slid something under my motel room door. I almost didn't notice it. I'd left the TV on, one of those late-night History Channel marathons where everything turns into an alien conspiracy. When I finally clicked it off, I saw the edge of an envelope sticking out on the carpet. No return address, no markings, just a single Polaroid inside, but not of me. It was a photo of the inside of my ranger cabin, taken from my bedroom door. My rifle was on the bed. My boots were at the foot of it. You could see the logbook I'd left open on the desk. The timestamp on the bottom corner was from the previous night, meaning someone had been inside while I slept just feet away. My legs gave out. I hit the floor, hands shaking so hard I almost tore the picture in half. I wanted to drive straight to the police, but what was I going to say? That someone broke into a government cabin and left me a photograph in a motel 50 miles away? I checked out before sunrise and drove back to the park. I don't know why. Maybe I was hoping to prove to myself it wasn't real, that the photo was old, that it was some kind of sick prank. I didn't care. When I opened the cabin door, I almost vomited. Everything was exactly as it had looked in the photo. Rifle on the bed. Logbook open to the same page. But now there were footprints. Muddy, coming in through the door, looping around the room, stopping right beside where I should have been sleeping. I followed them with my eyes. They didn't leave the way they came in. They led to the closet. My hand hovered over the knob. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed to burn the whole place down and run. But I opened it anyway. Empty, except for a second Ranger uniform hanging neatly on a wire hanger. No dust, no fold lines. It had been placed there recently. And on the shelf above it, there was something carved into the wood. Not a word this time. Just a symbol. 3 sharp lines pointing down like crooked teeth. And underneath it, the number, Sochstart 1973. I don't know why that hit me so hard, but it felt significant. Like a clue I couldn't read yet. I took a photo of it with my phone. First time I'd used the damn thing in days. That night, I made a decision. I needed answers. I remembered Charlie, the older ranger, the one who'd recognized Gilroy's name. He'd been around forever, long before most of us. Quiet guy, paranoid, but sharp. Lived up north near Sekiu in this little trailer with solar panels and no Wi-Fi. Total off-grid hermit. I drove up the next day. When I pulled into his gravel driveway, he was already standing outside, arms crossed. He looked like he hadn't slept. I was wondering how long it would take you to show up, he said, deadpan. I didn't say anything, just held up the picture of the carving, the 3 lines, the number. Charlie's face went pale. He didn't invite me inside. He just walked around back, grabbed a rusted metal tin from under a loose board on the porch, and handed it to me. Inside were old newspaper clippings, some yellowed, others water damaged, all about Olympic Park, and they all had one thing in common: Rangers missing, always alone. One headline read, "Local Ranger disappears without a trace." Last known location, Devil's Throat. Date, 1973. There was a photo, black and white, blurry. The man in the shot was standing in front of a fire pit. Same posture, same stiff stance, same wide-brimmed hat. Under the photo, in small type, Ranger Martin Gilroy. Charlie lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and said, he was never found. Search went on for weeks. No prints, no gear, just his name badge nailed to a tree. I asked him how he knew all this. He looked at me, dead serious. Because I saw him last month. Same place you did. He hasn't aged a day. He exhaled and said 5 words I'll never forget. Gilroy doesn't live alone anymore. Charlie wouldn't say more after that. I tried asking questions. What happened to Gilroy? What does the symbol mean? Who else knows? But he just stared off into the woods behind his trailer. Cigarette burned down to the filter, lips tight. It was like something in him had already decided I was too far gone to help. Before I left, he pressed an old laminated map into my hands. It was brittle at the corners, smelled like mildew and sweat, and had faded red markings drawn all across it. Circles, X's, dates. Some went back decades. Stay away from the places marked with the symbol, he muttered. If you see a second set of your own footprints, turn around. Don't follow the calls. Don't answer if it says your name. I asked what he meant by it. Charlie went back inside without a word. I drove off and pulled over a few miles down the road to study the map. Most of the marks were deep in the backcountry along trails that had since been shut down or renamed. But one of them, one of the red X's, was less than a mile from my station. Gravedigger's Hollow. I'd been there just once. No real trail, just a collapsed mine shaft from the turn of the century, tucked into a ridge of moss-covered stone, supposedly sealed after a rockfall. Nothing but stories and old warnings. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photo from 1973. Gilroy standing near the fire pit, just like I'd seen him. Just like he'd been standing when he watched me sleep. I waited until dusk before heading out. I didn't tell anyone. I packed the map, a flashlight, a sidearm, and a flare gun. Left a note taped to my bunk, just in case. If I'm not back by sunrise, don't look for me. Call state troopers and send them to Gravedigger's Hollow. The trail was overgrown, brush thick as a wall, trees hanging low like they were trying to hold me back. By the time I reached the ridge, It was almost full dark. My breath fogged in front of me. The air stank of mildew and something else, like burnt copper and wet fur. The mine shaft was still there, but it wasn't sealed anymore. The boards had been torn out, not rotted, ripped. Splinters splayed outward like claws had pried them loose. And in the dirt just outside the entrance, I found boot prints. 2 sets, one fresh, one older, but identical tread. Both were mine. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that maybe someone else wore the same boots, that maybe the ground had shifted. But then I heard it, that damn whistling. 3 notes, rising, slow. But this time it was inside the shaft. I raised the flashlight and stepped forward. Just inside the mouth, someone had painted on the wall in black ash and soot the symbol, the 3 crooked lines pointing down. Below it, scratched in with something sharp, were the words, "You were supposed to forget." My light flickered. Not the battery dying, this was something else, like the shadows were interfering with it. Then, just ahead, maybe 15 feet in, I saw him, Gilroy, standing in the tunnel, unmoving, hat low over his face. His ranger shirt was torn open, pale skin visible underneath like bark peeled off a tree. His arms were stiff, fingers bloated. But it was the smell that hit me hardest. Rot. Years old, the kind of smell that lives in your nose for days. I aimed my sidearm at him. "Don't move." He didn't. I stepped closer, my light shaking in my grip. He didn't breathe, didn't blink. I was almost within arm's reach when I realized he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. I spun around. There was another ranger behind me. Same uniform, same stance. No face, just blank skin where the eyes and mouth should be, stretched taut like wet paper. Its chest heaved once, and the sound it made was not a breath. It was a laugh, low, broken, like air pushed through shredded lungs. I fired the sidearm twice. The thing didn't flinch. I turned and sprinted out of the shaft, crashing through branches, rocks tearing into my shins. I didn't stop until I saw the glow of my cabin lights in the distance, every muscle in my body screaming. When I finally collapsed inside, I slammed the door shut and dropped to the floor. That was 2 days ago. Since then, the radios haven't worked. The generator cuts out at night. My phone battery is dead and won't recharge. Even the solar pack won't hold a charge. And last night I woke up to breathing. Not mine. Slow. Wet. Clothes. Coming from under my bed. When I finally got the guts to look, nothing was there. But carved into the wooden slats beneath my mattress were 3 words, jagged and deep. "You're next, Ranger." I haven't left the cabin in over 30 hours. I don't know what time it is anymore. My watch stopped at 3:17 a.m. and hasn't ticked since. Every window is covered, every door locked, though I don't know why I bother. Whatever this is, locks don't seem to matter. The last time I looked outside, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a hiker. Maybe help, finally. But then I saw the uniform. That same goddamn ranger outfit. It looked just like mine, except older, faded, as if time had worn through it, until only the idea of the uniform remained. He was standing at the tree line, motionless. Then another one appeared beside him. And another. 3 of them, all identical, all still. None of them moved. None of them came closer. They just watched. I tried the radio again. Static. I tried the flare gun, fired it into the sky like a last desperate scream. Nothing. That night, they got closer. I didn't hear them, didn't see them move. But when I woke up, muddy footprints circled the outside of the cabin. More than 3 now, dozens. Some small, some too large to be human. But all boot prints, all from Ranger-issue gear. The door had scratches on it, deep, uneven. Like someone had dragged a nail or a key across the wood over and over. Not trying to get in, just reminding me they could. There's a pattern to them. I can see it now. 3 long lines, down over and over again. Again and again. That symbol. I thought I was losing my mind until I checked the old employee ledger, the one we keep in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one nobody ever looks at. Names, dates, assignments. In 1973, 4 Rangers were listed for patrol in this section of Olympic. Martin Gilroy, Harlan Brooks, Samuel Dawes, and a 4th name that's been blacked out, literally scratched from the paper. But something's faint behind it. I rubbed it with a pencil, shaded the spot like you do with an old gravestone. The outline of my name. Mine. The year was wrong, though. It didn't say 2025. It said 1973. I don't know what this place is. A loop. A trap. Something left behind. Older than the park. Older than people. Maybe we were never meant to be here. Maybe that's why they put rangers out here in the first place. Not to protect the park from people, but to protect people from what's underneath it. I'm writing this on the backs of old trail maps, pages torn from the ranger manual. Anything I can leave behind, because I hear them now. Inside. Not footsteps. Breathing. Low. Close. All around. They've finally come in. I saw the door creak open. Not forced, just invited. Like the cabin itself was tired of holding them back. The last thing I saw before the lights went out was my reflection in the window. But it wasn't me. It was Gilroy. Smiling. Wearing my badge. If you find this, don't come looking. Don't answer if they call your name. And whatever you do, don't put on the hat. The moment our tires crunched on the gravel driveway of that rental near Mount Rainier, I knew this trip was going to be something else. I've always had a knack for sensing when things are about to turn sideways. Maybe it's the Montana in me, or maybe it's just because I've read too many creepy novels. Either way, as I looked out at the dense Washington forest that surrounded us, I felt an itch at the back of my mind. My friends were a mix of excitement and exhaustion as we unloaded our bags. Alex, the planner of our group, had found this place. "Guys, this is going to be epic," he said with a grin that was too wide to be just about the scenery. Sarah, the skeptic, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her curiosity. And then there was Mark, always ready for anything, camera in hand. We were greeted by Michelle, our rental host, who had the rugged, weathered look of someone who'd spent her life outdoors. She was across the street tending to a horse in a pasture that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Welcome," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Intrigue, maybe. We all walked over to greet her, eager to stretch our legs and get to know the place. Michelle had a way about her that was both disarming and slightly unnerving. She offered to show us around her property, and we eagerly agreed. The place was more than just a house. It was a slice of untouched wilderness, complete with more horses and a smattering of other animals. But it was when we crossed over to her backyard, past her quaint wooden house, that things started to get interesting. Michelle gathered us in a circle, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and excitement. "So, do you guys want to go back home with a story?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. How could we say no? We followed her past a barn, walking into a part of her backyard that was more forest than garden. The ground was soft underfoot, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. About 100 feet in, Michelle stopped. "Stop. Look down," she instructed. At our feet was a footprint, but not just any footprint. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own, and oddly shaped, wider and longer than any humans could be. And there were toe imprints, clear as day. "This," Michelle said, a serious tone replacing her earlier playfulness, "was made by a Sasquatch." A Sasquatch. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I glanced at my friends and saw their expressions mirror my own, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Michelle went on to tell us how she found the imprint, and then, almost as an afterthought, how she had come to own this land and the property across the street where we were staying. Her voice took on a somber note. "You might think I'm crazy, but if I knew about their existence, I would have never moved here. Do you want to see more?" There was a collective pause, a moment where we all considered the sanity of following this path. But adventure has a way of tipping the scales. We nodded, and Michelle led us deeper into the woods. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us. The chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves were the only sounds that accompanied our footsteps. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the kind you get when you realize you're part of a story much bigger than yourself. And as the shadows lengthened around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. We ventured further into the dense Washington woods. I felt an uneasiness creep up my spine. I've been in plenty of wild places, but there was something about these woods, shrouded in twilight, that felt different. The trees loomed over us like silent giants, their branches casting long, strange shadows that danced in the breeze. Michelle led us with a confidence that only comes from someone who knows every inch of their land. She was part guide, part storyteller, weaving a narrative that was as captivating as it was unsettling. We were deep in her territory now, far from the comforts of the rental. "Here," Michelle said, stopping suddenly. She pointed at the ground to a cluster of sticks. They were arranged in a way that was too deliberate to be the work of nature. "I laid these out earlier today. Look how they've been moved." We circled around the sticks, the air thick with intrigue. The arrangement was peculiar, like a cryptic message left by an unknown hand. Michelle's theory was that the Sasquatch were mischievous creatures, fond of small pranks like this. It was hard to digest, but out here in the embrace of the wilderness, anything seemed possible. As we walked on, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The forest had a presence, a personality almost. It was as if the trees themselves were alive with secrets, whispering tales of the unknown. Michelle's next words sent a chill down my spine. "Right about here is where you might feel something unusual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And she was right. The air around us felt charged, electric. The hair on my arms stood on end. And I wasn't the only one. Alex looked around nervously, and even Sarah, our group skeptic, seemed uneasy. "They asked me to bring you here," Michelle continued, her voice taking on a solemn tone. "The Sasquatch, I mean. They wanted to say hello." I tried to process her words. Were we really being summoned by a legendary creature, or was this all an elaborate ruse? But before I could ponder further, Michelle posed a question that cut through the silence like a knife. "Has any of you recently lost a brother, or experienced psychic abilities?" We exchanged glances, each of us shaking our heads. The question hung in the air, adding to the thickening plot of our little adventure. Our journey took us to the last point of our walk. Michelle's eyes widened as she examined another set of sticks. "I can't believe it," she murmured. Earlier, she had laid them out, and now they were rearranged, just like the first set. She spoke of how she often left gifts for the Sasquatch, food mostly, and how they always disappeared. I was skeptical, to say the least. I've spent enough time in the wild to know that plenty of creatures could be responsible for missing food. But there was something in Michelle's conviction that made me question my doubts. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, we heard it. A sound that defied description. It was distant but clear, a bizarre chorus of hoots and laughs unlike anything I've ever heard. Michelle's face lit up. "That's them," she said with certainty. "The Sasquatch." We stood there in the heart of the forest, listening to the haunting melody of the wild. It was a moment suspended in time, a crossroads between the known and the unknown. As we made our way back to the cabin, the forest seemed to whisper its secrets, leaving us with more questions than answers. Back at the rental, the night had wrapped itself around the cabin like a dark, enigmatic blanket. We sat on the porch, nursing our drinks, each lost in thought. The conversation swirled around our bizarre encounter, theories tossed back and forth like a game of catch. Alex was all in, buying every word Michelle had said. Sarah remained skeptical, her brows knitted in doubt. And Mark, well, he seemed more interested in capturing the perfect night shot of the woods than joining our debate. The thing about the wilderness is, it has a way of stripping down your beliefs, leaving you raw and open to possibilities you'd scoff at in the light of day. And right then, under the vast starry sky, I felt that vulnerability. "I'm going back out there," declared Alex suddenly, his voice cutting through the night. "I have to see this for myself." Mark, ever the adventurer, didn't hesitate to join him. I watched them disappear into the tree line, their flashlights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the darkness. Left alone, I felt a strange sense of solitude. I wasn't up for chasing shadows in the woods. Instead, I rolled a joint and settled into the quiet, letting the serene beauty of the Washington wilderness wash over me. The cabin, with its warm lights and rustic charm, felt like a sanctuary. But the stillness of the night was deceptive. As I sat there, lost in the tranquility, it happened again. That sound, distant but unmistakable. The eerie, almost otherworldly call that Michelle had attributed to the Sasquatch. It started as an owl's hoot, morphing into that bizarre, monkey-like laughter. I froze, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just some nocturnal animal. There was an intelligence in that sound, a deliberate communication that transcended the barriers of the known world. I wanted to dismiss it, to rationalize it as the trickery of the night. But sitting there alone in the vastness of the wilderness, I couldn't. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, the sound echoing in my mind long after it had faded away. When Alex and Mark finally returned, I relayed my experience, but they hadn't heard anything. Their skepticism was evident, and I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't heard it with my own ears, I might have been skeptical too. The night wore on, and eventually we retreated to the warmth of the cabin. But sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, my mind racing with questions. What were those sounds? Was Michelle playing an elaborate prank, or was there something more to her stories? Driven by a restless curiosity, I grabbed my phone and did what any modern-day seeker of truth would do. I Googled, Washington State creepy laugh animal. The first result was an article titled, Bigfoot or Animals? Hair-raising sounds coming from a swamp on Indian reservation in Oregon. My heart skipped a beat. The description matched what I had heard perfectly. As I lay there staring into the darkness, I realized that the wilderness holds more mysteries than we can fathom. And sometimes the line between legend and reality is thinner than we dare to believe. Morning in the Washington wilderness is like waking up in a different world. The light filters through the trees in a soft golden haze, painting everything in a hue of tranquility. But that morning, as I sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, the beauty of the surroundings was overshadowed by the lingering questions from the previous night. The article I had found about the Bigfoot sounds in Oregon was still open on my phone. I reread it, searching for some clue, some rational explanation. But the words just danced around the possibility of the unknown, offering no concrete answers. Alex and Mark were the first to join me, their steps heavy with the lack of any real discovery from their nocturnal expedition. Sarah followed, her skepticism now mixed with a tinge of curiosity. We sat there in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The conversation from last night resumed, but with a different tone. Now, there was a sense of wonder, a willingness to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Michelle's stories than we had initially believed. It was time to leave the cabin, to say goodbye to the mystery that had enveloped us for the past couple of days. We packed our things, the mood subdued. The encounter with the unknown had touched each of us in different ways, leaving a mark that wouldn't easily fade. As we loaded the car, Michelle appeared. Her demeanor was the same as when we first met her, a mix of the earthly and the ethereal. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said, her eyes twinkling with unspoken knowledge. We exchanged farewells, but her words stayed with me. Had we found what we were looking for, or had we stumbled upon a mystery that was never meant to be solved? The drive back was quiet, each mile taking us further away from the enigmatic woods and back to our reality. But the wilderness has a way of staying with you, its mystery seeping into your soul. In the days that followed, I found myself diving deeper into the lore of the Sasquatch, reading accounts, watching documentaries. The skeptic in me battled with the part that had heard those unexplainable sounds in the dark. The rational part of my brain argued for logic, but the primal part, the part that had sat alone on that porch, knew that some things defy explanation. I realized then that the wilderness is more than just trees and wildlife. It's a living, breathing entity filled with secrets and stories that go back centuries. And sometimes it chooses to reveal a glimpse of its mysteries, not to provide answers, but to remind us that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. As I sat at my desk, the city noises a stark contrast to the serene silence of the woods, I knew the experience would stay with me. The line between legend and reality might be blurred, but sometimes the mystery is more important than the truth. In the end, our Sasquatch experience in Washington state was a journey into the unknown, a reminder of the vast and unexplored mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. This trail has been closed since 1986. I found out why. I've been a park ranger for almost 5 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunken campers, lost hikers, black bears pawing through dumpsters, even the occasional cryptic scratch mark on tree trunks that someone swore was from a mountain lion, despite the fact that we haven't had those around here in decades. But last month, I found something that's been gnawing at my brain ever since. It was late October, just before the snow really starts coming down in the northern Rockies. I was pulling solo duty at Pine Haven National Park, a massive stretch of wilderness in Montana that doesn't get nearly as many visitors as places like Glacier or Yellowstone. It's quieter, less polished, and honestly, it's my favorite post. That night, I was supposed to patrol the Eastern Ridge trails, make sure no idiots were sneaking into camp without permits. We'd had issues before, college kids from Missoula thinking they're invincible, ignoring the warnings about early snow, or worse, the missing persons reports that still trickled in every couple of years. I was finishing up my thermos of gas station coffee, sitting in the cracked leather seat of the Ranger truck, when the radio crackled. Unit 4, you copy. I grabbed the mic. Yeah, this is 4. Hey, got a report of a light on the Elk Ridge Trail. Thought you should check it out before you clock out. Probably nothing. My stomach sank. Elk Ridge had been officially closed since 1986 after a rockslide wiped out a good chunk of the switchbacks. The park never reopened it. Too unstable, they said. But every now and then, you'd hear stories. Strange figures spotted near the trailhead, weird noises coming from that part of the park at night. Hikers who got turned around and ended up back there and didn't come out. Copy that, I said, trying to sound casual, though I felt my fingers tense up on the steering wheel. I headed east, bumping along the dirt road, pine trees crowding in on both sides. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt, the kind of isolation that makes your skin crawl. I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror every so often, half expecting to see headlights behind me, though I knew no one else should be out here. When I reached the Elk Ridge trailhead, I killed the engine and stepped out. The wind cut through my uniform, sharp and cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The place was choked with overgrowth, thorny brush curling over what was once a well-maintained path, wooden signs, long rotted and splintered, some sagging to the ground. And then I saw it, a flicker of orange light maybe 50 yards up the trail, just past a bend. I told myself it was probably a lost hiker with a lantern or a flashlight. Maybe even some dumb teens trying to scare each other. I radioed back, told them I was going in to check it out. As I made my way up the trail, the crunch of gravel and dead leaves under my boots sounded impossibly loud. I kept glancing over my shoulder, swearing I heard faint shuffling behind me. But every time I turned, the woods stood still, dark and unmoving. The light stayed steady ahead, just out of reach, like it was leading me deeper in. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept moving. About 20 minutes up, the trail narrowed. I rounded a sharp curve where the trees thinned slightly, and that's when I saw him. A man standing by what looked like the collapsed remains of an old wooden bridge. He was facing away from me, motionless, wearing what looked like a ranger's uniform, or at least what used to be a ranger's uniform. The fabric was faded, sun-bleached, the sleeves shredded. His boots were caked with mud, one laced, the other flopping open like he'd forgotten how to tie it. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound firm, though my throat felt tight. "This trail's closed. You all right?" He didn't turn, didn't even flinch. The lantern at his feet burned with that strange, steady glow, not flickering like a regular flame, more like a dim, constant beam. I took a cautious step closer, hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped on my shoulder. "Sir, you need to come with me. This area is off limits." Still nothing. and then his head jerked like he'd been yanked by invisible strings, twisting slightly toward me, but not all the way. I couldn't see his face clearly. Just the outline of a sunken cheek, a mouth half open. His jaw twitched once, then again, like he was trying to speak but couldn't form words. That's when I noticed the patch on his shoulder. Pine Haven Ranger Service. But the logo, it was the old design, the one they stopped using decades ago, and his name tag, barely hanging on by a thread, read Murray. I know that name. I've seen it in the break room on a faded, yellowed missing persons notice from 1986. Ranger Charles Murray disappeared during a routine patrol on Elk Ridge Trail. Never found. Presumed dead. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest, and then he turned fully. I can't describe his face. Not really. It wasn't rotted, not like a corpse, but it wasn't right either. His skin looked wrong, like wax left too close to a fire, sagging and warped. His eyes were wide, glassy, and his mouth hung open just enough to reveal cracked, dark teeth. He lifted one arm, pointing past me down the trail. His hand trembled violently, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out like a rasping whisper. Turn back. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't look back, not until I was nearly to the truck, lungs burning, vision swimming. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the trail was empty. The light was gone. The woods stood silent and dark as if nothing had ever been there. I drove back to the ranger station, shaking so hard I almost clipped a tree on the way down. I didn't report what I saw. I told them there was no one up there. No lights. Nothing. But the next night, when I was alone in the office, I went to the old records. I pulled Murray's file, and I found something I wish I hadn't. Scrawled on the last page, barely legible, was a note from the original search team. Do not reopen Elk Ridge. If anyone sees lights or hears the name Murray, tell them to leave. Do not let them follow. I don't know what's up there. I just know I'm never going back. That night, even after I got home, small, creaky apartment above the old bakery in town, I just sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, jacket still zipped up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying it over and over, that sagging face, those trembling fingers pointing, that voice like dry leaves scraping across the ground. Turn back. God. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion, long shift, thin mountain air, maybe even leftover adrenaline. I hadn't eaten much that day, hadn't drunk enough water. Rangers sometimes joked about trail madness, the way your mind plays tricks on you when you're alone too long in the woods. I wanted to believe that's all it was. But then the messages started. The first came through the park's central radio midday. Unit 4, check in. I pressed the mic. 4 here. We got another report, dispatch crackled back. Hikers said they saw a ranger up by the old Elk Ridge overlook. My stomach dropped. That can't be right, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. That trail's blocked. No one should be up there. That's what we told them, but they were pretty insistent. Said the guy was in uniform, waving them down. I almost dropped the mic. My fingers felt ice cold. I'll take a look. I didn't want to go. Every bone in my body screamed at me to turn off the radio, make up an excuse, do anything else. But I'd been a ranger long enough to know you can't ignore a call. So I went. The drive out was even worse this time. The air felt heavier, like the sky was pressing down on the forest. My ears kept popping the way they do when you're gaining elevation, except I wasn't. I was heading across a familiar flat stretch. It was like the pressure was wrong somehow, like the atmosphere was off just around that part of the park. I reached the overlook trailhead by late afternoon. It was quiet, way too quiet. Usually, you hear at least some bird chatter, maybe the distant knock of a woodpecker, squirrels rustling in the underbrush. Today, nothing, just dead air. I stepped onto the path, moving slow, boots crunching through frostbitten leaves. The trees here were old, towering lodgepole pines mixed with ancient Douglas fir, their bark blackened and scarred from wildfires decades past. The trail twisted ahead, pale and narrow, half swallowed by creeping vines and roots. About halfway up, I saw it. A boot print. Fresh. Not from a hiker. Too heavy. Too wide. More like a work boot. Ranger issue. My heartbeat spiked. I crouched down, fingers brushing the dirt. There was a faint drag mark too, like whoever made the print had stumbled or limped. I followed the trail carefully, every step feeling like I was walking into a trap. The light was fading fast. Twilight in the woods is a strange thing. Shadows thicken and everything feels closer, tighter, like the trees are leaning in to listen. At the crest of the ridge, I spotted something through the branches. A figure. Not moving, just standing there. I raised my voice. "Hey, park ranger here? Are you all right?" The figure didn't react. I forced myself forward, closer. Now I could see he was facing away, just like before. Same uniform, old design, patch barely hanging on, same muddy boots. It was him. "Murray," I called out, throat dry. The figure twitched. My breath hitched. I took a shaky step back, instinct roaring in my chest. And then, in a voice like brittle paper, "You shouldn't be here." I wanted to run. God, I wanted to turn and run, but my legs locked up. My mouth opened, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He turned slightly, enough that I could see the ruined edge of his face, cracked skin, sunken eyes, the corners of his mouth torn upward in a grotesque, slack smile. "Go back." And then, behind him, deeper in the trees, something moved. I don't know what it was. I couldn't see it clearly. Just a shape, tall, thin, gliding between the pines, barely making a sound. My brain scrambled, trying to make sense of it. Another person? An animal? But no, it was too tall, too smooth. Almost human, but not. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. Murray's head snapped toward the movement, and for the first time I saw something flicker across his ruined face. Panic. He lifted one arm, pointing frantically at me. "Go." That broke the spell. I turned and ran. I don't remember the sprint back down the trail. I don't remember the drive. I just remember bursting into the ranger station, slamming the door behind me, chest heaving, lungs on fire. One of the other rangers, Sarah, looked up from her paperwork. "Jesus, you look like hell. What happened?" I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a broken, breathless whisper. "Something's up there." She frowned, confused. "On Elk Ridge? I thought you said it was just a dead trail." I shook my head. "No, there's something on that mountain." She opened her mouth, probably to tell me to calm down, but just then the radio crackled. "Unit 4, come in." It was dispatch. I snatched up the mic. "This is 4. A pause. Then, in a voice I swear to God sounded just like mine, distorted and slow. "Don't leave." I dropped the mic. Sarah's face went pale. We both just stared at each other. The static from the radio filled the room, the words echoing in the back of my skull. "Don't leave." I didn't sleep that night either. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't over. I didn't go into work the next day. I told them I was sick, called Sarah early, voice shaking, said I had chills, fever, whatever I could think of. She sounded surprised but didn't push. Honestly, I think she was relieved. Maybe she thought I needed a break after the weirdness yesterday. But the truth is, I didn't want to be anywhere near the park. I stayed holed up in my apartment, blinds drawn, sitting on the couch with the TV on, just for background noise. Netflix played some dumb cooking show on loop, but I wasn't watching. I just sat there staring at the wall, replaying everything over and over. Murray's face, that thing behind him moving through the trees, the voice on the radio. My voice, warped and slow, telling me, "Don't leave." By evening, I thought maybe I was cracking up. I even Googled stress-induced hallucinations, paranoia, auditory distortions, anything to explain what was happening. Maybe it was burnout, or maybe I just spent too much time alone in the woods. I was halfway convincing myself of that when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" At first, just static. Then a faint voice, barely audible over the hiss. "Come back." I slammed the phone down so hard it bounced off the coffee table. I didn't sleep again. By 3 a.m., I was pacing the apartment, sweaty, jittery, jumping at every creak and car passing outside. I knew I couldn't stay like this. I needed answers. And there was only one place I was going to get them. By dawn, I was driving back toward Pine Haven. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to do anything stupid. I'd just swing by the ranger station, pull the old files, maybe talk to some of the senior guys. Hell, maybe I'd even tell Sarah what was going on. She'd seen how shaken I was. Maybe she'd believe me. But as soon as I pulled into the lot, I saw the station door hanging open. My stomach knotted. I killed the engine, stepped out carefully, listening. The place was quiet, except for the soft rattle of the wind through the flagpole. "Hello?" I called softly. "Sarah?" No answer. Inside, the lights were flickering. Papers were scattered across the floor. Chairs knocked over. Someone's coffee mug lay shattered on the ground. Dark liquid pooled beneath. I edged toward the back office where we kept the records. My boots crunched softly over the mess. I reached for the handle and froze. On the door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Stay away from the ridge." My breath hitched. I pushed inside. The office was a disaster zone. Filing cabinets yanked open, folders whipped apart. But one thing caught my eye. An old cardboard box shoved into the corner, half buried under loose files. I dragged it out. Inside were photographs, yellowed, curling at the edges. Black and white shots of the park from decades ago. Rangers standing proudly at trailheads. Groups posing near waterfalls. Smiling faces by the old ranger station that had burned down years ago. And then, near the bottom, I found something different. A photo of Murray. He looked younger, clean-shaven, smiling awkwardly at the camera, one hand resting on a tree trunk. But behind him, just barely visible, was a shadow. Not a trick of the light. Not a person. A shape. Tall, thin, smooth. Almost human. I felt a cold sweat break out down my back. My fingers trembled as I pulled out another photo. This one from a search party. Rangers standing in a line, flashlights pointed into the dark, faces tense. Again, in the distance, the shape, watching. I slammed the box shut. That's when I heard the bang. I spun, heart hammering. The front door of the station was swinging open, slamming hard against the wall in the wind. No, not the wind. A figure stood just outside. I barely saw it. Just a flash. Ranger uniform, faded, ragged, face pale and sunken. Murray. He stood there, half shrouded in shadow, one hand raised, trembling. I could barely hear it, but his lips moved. "Behind you." I turned, chest clenching, and saw for the briefest moment the reflection in the office window. Tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes. It was right behind me. I didn't think. I bolted, ran straight out the back door through the trees, stumbling over roots and brush, branches clawing at my arms and face. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. By the time I reached my truck, my breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to crack my ribs open. When I finally peeled out of the lot, tires skidding over gravel, I dared a glance back at the station. Empty. No figure. No shadow. But just as I turned onto the main road, I saw something in the rearview mirror. For a split second, standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, smooth. Watching. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me yet. I didn't go home. After I tore out of the Pine Haven lot, I just kept driving. Past the park boundary, past the small grocery store where the locals buy their bait and beer. Past the gas station that always smells like burnt coffee. I didn't even know where I was headed. I just needed to move. By the time I stopped, I was 2 hours south in a Walmart parking lot, hands shaking on the steering wheel, chest tight like I'd been holding my breath the entire drive. I sat there as the sun dipped behind the mountains, watching families shuffle in and out of the store, listening to the faint, hollow hum of some teenager's bass-heavy music thumping from a nearby car. It should have felt normal. It should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Even here, surrounded by people, I felt it. Like something was standing just out of sight, just beyond the corners of my vision, watching, waiting. I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly, looking for something to ground me. I even pulled up Murray's missing person file again, rereading the details, like maybe I'd missed something. Patrol gone wrong, radioed in his location, never returned, declared missing after 48 hours. Except they did find something. I dug back into the search reports I'd photographed earlier, flicking through the images until I found the small, crumpled note they'd logged. Do not let anyone follow. What the hell did that mean? Was Murray warning me? Or was he part of this? Now I sat there, the question swirling in my brain like dirty water down a drain, until my phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. Again. I froze for a long moment, just staring at the screen. The little green accept button seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Against every ounce of common sense, I answered. Hello? No static this time, just breathing. Slow, shallow, wet sounding. Then a whisper, low and cracked, like someone speaking through a broken mouth. You're already marked. My stomach lurched. I hung up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. For a few minutes, I just sat there shaking, trying to slow my breathing. I wanted to call someone, a friend, another ranger, even the sheriff. But who the hell would believe me? Hi! Yeah! I think a dead ranger and some faceless thing are following me. Yeah, that'd go over well. Instead, I forced myself to think. If whatever this was had attached itself to me, how did I break it? The only thing that made sense was going back. I didn't want to. God, I did not want to. But if I just kept running, how long before it found me anyway? I waited until full dark before I turned the truck around. The highway back to Pine Haven was a black ribbon winding through endless pine and spruce. Every now and then, headlights from an oncoming car would flash by, momentarily lighting the trees, making me jump every time I thought I saw movement at the edge of the road. By midnight, I was back at the park boundary. The gates were closed. I parked the truck, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The wind whispered through the trees, sending dry needles skittering across the pavement. Somewhere far off, a lone owl called. The rest was silence. I climbed the locked gate, boots slipping slightly on the icy metal, and dropped down on the other side. The park stretched out ahead, dark and still. My breath puffed out in clouds as I hiked toward the trailhead. And then, a light just ahead. Flickering orange. Lantern light. I crept forward slowly, heart pounding in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to stop. And there he was, Murray, standing at the mouth of the Elk Ridge Trail, same tattered uniform, same ruined face. He raised one hand, trembling, and for the first time I saw his eyes clearly. They were wide, terrified, not at me, but at something behind him. He mouthed one word, run, and then I heard it, a dragging sound like something impossibly tall sliding through the trees, not walking, not stepping, gliding. I stumbled back, but my boots slipped on the frost and I hit the ground hard, breath knocked from my lungs. From where I lay, I could just barely see past Murray, and in the shadows beyond, it was there. The shape, tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes, no mouth, but I felt it watching me. It raised one long, impossibly thin arm and pointed not at me, at Murray. Murray turned sharply, mouth opening in a silent scream, and in an instant he was gone, like smoke sucked into a vacuum. No sound, no flash, just gone. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting back toward the gate, lungs burning, legs shaking. I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, but a pressure. A pull, like the very air was bending, warping, chasing. I didn't stop until I hit the gate, nearly falling as I climbed over, tearing my jacket on the barbed top. When I landed on the other side, I didn't look back. I ran straight for the truck, slammed the door, and peeled out onto the highway, tires screeching. And for a long time, I just drove. I don't remember how long, maybe hours, maybe all night. But by the time I stopped, the sun was just starting to rise, pink and gold creeping over the mountains. I sat there shaking, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something move in the back seat. But when I turned, the seat was empty. I don't know what it wants, but I don't think I left it behind. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of stepping into my dark, narrow apartment, drawing the blinds, turning off the lights, it made my skin crawl. I kept picturing that empty space behind me in the rearview mirror, imagining the faintest shift of a shadow, the slightest creak of floorboards under weight that shouldn't be there. So I drove, all morning, all afternoon. I pulled through Starbucks twice, not because I was hungry, but because the chatter of the workers, the hiss of the espresso machine, the ambient noise, it made me feel normal for brief moments. I didn't tell anyone. Not Sarah, not my supervisor, not the sheriff. Hell, not even the guy at the drive-through window who gave me a second cup by mistake and joked, "Long night, huh?" If I opened my mouth, it all comes spilling out. And I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. By early evening, I found myself parked outside a Walmart again, this time in a neighboring town. I watched shoppers push carts stacked with bottled water, toilet paper, snacks, garden mulch, just everyday, boring stuff. I craved that mundanity like oxygen. My phone buzzed. Blocked number. I squeezed it in my hand so hard I thought the screen would crack. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I didn't press it. It stopped ringing. And then a text. You can't run. No punctuation. No capital letters. I felt bile rise in my throat. I shut the phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat, forcing myself to breathe. My hands were shaking again, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I ran my palms over my face, willing myself to think, to do something. I didn't know what. Then, tap, tap, tap. I jolted. Someone was at the window. A man, mid-40s maybe, scruffy beard, wearing a green hiking jacket and cargo pants. He smiled awkwardly when I jumped, holding up both hands like, sorry, sorry. I cracked the window. Hey, sorry, man, he said, voice a little hoarse. Didn't mean to startle you. It's fine, I mumbled. Just, are you a ranger? His eyes flicked to the gear on my passenger seat, the Pine Haven jacket, the radio, the battered park map. Yeah, I said warily. His face shifted, lips tightening. You were at Pine Haven last night, weren't you? My stomach dropped. How do you know that? I was there too. He glanced around as if checking who was nearby. Saw the light up on Elk Ridge. Saw something else too. I stared at him, pulse hammering in my ears. He leaned in slightly. I don't know what you saw, man, but it's following me too. A rush of cold hit my spine. We sat there in silence for a second. I looked him over, trying to gauge if this was some weird joke or a desperate, grasping truth. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed dark with exhaustion. His hands gripping the window edge trembled faintly. What did you see? I asked quietly. His jaw worked. I don't even know. I was hiking up near the old trail, heard something moving, saw a lantern. I thought maybe someone was lost. But then he stopped, swallowing hard. I ran, he finished. I've been running since. A thought hit me, sharp, electric, terrifying. If he was marked too, maybe we could figure this out together. Maybe we weren't completely alone in this. I killed the engine, unlocked the door, and stepped out. Let's talk, I said. He nodded, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Yeah, okay. My car is just over here. I followed him, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. We crossed the parking lot toward a dusty gray Subaru parked under one of the flickering overhead lights. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking worse now, and I caught the faintest tremor in his voice as he said, I don't know how to stop this, man. I haven't slept in 2 days. I keep thinking. Click. He unlocked the door, and that's when I saw it through the back window in the reflection. It was standing behind us. Tall, thin, smooth. No face. My throat closed up, and before I could even yell, he turned just in time to see it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The thing raised one arm, long and jointless, pointing, not at him, not at me, but at the car. For one awful moment, I saw his face twist in realization, sheer, unfiltered terror. And then, like smoke in the wind, he was gone. Just gone. His keys clattered to the ground. The only sound in the empty lot. I staggered back, chest heaving, heart in my throat. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my legs locked. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting, and then it raised its hand again, this time pointing at me. My vision blurred, and a roaring sound filled my head like rushing water. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground, gasping, clawing at the pavement as if I could hold onto the world. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The lot was empty. The Subaru sat there unlocked, abandoned, and I was alone. Alone, but marked. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. I don't remember starting the engine or pulling onto the road or even driving the first 20 miles. I just remember the feeling, that hollow, ringing emptiness inside my chest, like something had been scooped out of me. Like my body was running on fumes, the shell of a person just barely holding together. By the time I realized where I was going, the sign was already in front of me. Pine Haven National Park, closed for winter season. The gates loomed up, chains tangled around the bars. I sat there in the cab, watching the trees sway in the wind, headlights carving faint shapes in the underbrush. I knew it was a trap. I knew going back was insane. But what was the alternative? Keep running until it took me? Sit in some motel room until I faded out like the man in the Walmart lot? I stepped out of the truck. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and biting, but it barely registered. My fingers worked numbly at the gate, pulling at the chains until they gave just enough for me to slip through. And then I was walking back toward Elk Ridge, back toward the trail that had been closed since 1986. The woods were silent, except for the faint whisper of wind. My boots crunched over the frostbitten dirt, the air sharp in my lungs. Every step felt heavier, like something was pressing against me. Not just the cold, not just the fear, but something bigger, thicker. Like the very air was closing in. I reached the mouth of the trail, and there, waiting, was Murray. Same sunken eyes, same tattered uniform, same trembling hand raised in warning. But this time I didn't stop. I stepped closer. His mouth opened, jaw shaking, that voice scraping out like dry leaves. "You can't." I shook my head. "I don't have a choice." His hand dropped. His shoulders sagged like some invisible weight had crushed the last bit of fight out of him. And then slowly, he turned. He walked ahead, lantern flickering dimly in his hand, leading me up the trail. I followed. We climbed higher, past the broken switchbacks, past the dead trees and overgrown brush, until we reached the ridge. The wind howled here, sharp and endless, rattling through the burned-out trees. And waiting at the top it stood, tall, thin, smooth. No face, no mouth, no eyes, but I felt its gaze lock onto me. For a moment, Murray stood between us, lantern shaking, shoulders tense, and then the thing lifted one long, jointless arm and pointed, not at me, at him. Murray's body jerked, head snapping up, mouth opening in a silent scream as his form began to unravel, pieces fading like ash in the wind. I lunged forward instinctively, reaching out. No! But my hand passed straight through him, catching only cold, empty air. In a heartbeat, he was gone, just like the others. And then the thing turned its hand, pointing at me. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, heart slamming so hard I thought my ribs would crack open. I could feel it pulling at me, the same unraveling force, the same hollow emptiness creeping into my bones. But then a voice, low, faint, right by my ear. "Run." I don't know how. I don't know where the strength came from. But my legs moved. I ran. I ran like hell, stumbling, crashing through the underbrush, breath burning in my throat. Behind me, I could feel the air twisting, warping, the forest bending in impossible ways. Trees groaned and split. The ground seemed to ripple under my feet. But I ran, all the way back down the ridge, all the way through the forest, all the way to the truck. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door shut, fumbled the keys, and peeled out onto the main road, driving faster than I ever have in my life. The forest fell away behind me, dark and silent. I didn't stop. Not until I crossed the county line. Not until I saw the familiar glow of gas stations, fast food joints, Walmart, Costco, the real world bleeding back in, grounding me. But even now, even as I sit here in a crowded McDonald's parking lot, surrounded by people, music, lights, I can still feel it. Watching, waiting. I don't know why it hasn't finished the job. I don't know if it's done with me. But I know one thing. I'll never go back. Not to Pine Haven, not to Elk Ridge, not to that trail, because some places, they were never meant to be reopened. I've been a fire lookout for about a year now. I spend most of my life alone in a small, window-lined, one-room shack atop a steel and wood-frame tower in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My only companions are my collection of cheap novels, a laptop computer with infrequent and unreliable internet service, and the two-way radio I use to communicate with the few nearby towers and ranger stations. Nearby is a bit of a misnomer, though. Using my high-powered binoculars, I can just barely make out Tower 12 on a clear day, situated several miles to my west. Tower 15, the next nearest to my location, only appears as a glint of sunlight to my east when the sun catches it just right. I've been told the Parks Department intends to put up some additional towers in this area as soon as it gets the necessary funding, which is probably no time soon. That's fine with me, though. I like the solitude. It helps quiet my mind, keeps the memories at bay. Mostly, I occupy my days either with simple maintenance in and around the tower or scanning the dense trees all around me for any signs of trouble. It's been a dry year, so the threat of fire is a constant one. This particular afternoon, I was clearing some brush from around the base of the tower that had begun to encroach on the fire road leading back to the nearby ranger station 20 miles away. Even with the heavy suspension of the government-issued Jeep, the road was a harsh ride at the best of times. I had just finished dragging some brush cuttings off into the tree line when the radio clipped to my belt squawked. Tower 9. This is Tower 12. Do you copy? It was Billy Johnson, my supervisor. Nice enough guy, I suppose. Tended to leave me alone most of the time. I straightened up and stretched my back, wiping the sweat from my eyes with my forearm and keyed the microphone attached to my shoulder. Go for Tower 9, I replied as I replaced the shears and bow saw into the small storage shed near the base of the stairs. John, do you have eyes on a bit of smoke north of your position? Stand by, Billy, I said, snatching up my water bottle and jogging to the metal staircase that wound its way around the tower. I didn't bother locking the 8-foot chain-link fence surrounding my little compound. Chances were I'd be back soon enough. Reaching the top, I stepped through the trapdoor and onto the walkway that circled the cabin, closing it behind me. It was habit at this point. The last thing I needed was to take an errant step and tumble down through the open hatch. I'd probably end up breaking my neck. As I passed by, I reached into the open door of the shack and grabbed the binoculars hanging on a nearby hook. Rounding the railed corner of the walkway and turning my attention to the dark green blanket of trees stretching out before me, I saw the smoke almost instantly. A thin trickle of wispy white haze rose lazily above the canopy some distance off. Probably just some campers, I figured, though there weren't any approved campsites in that area. We always had more than a few folks each season who decided that camping off-trail in the deep bush sounded like quite a hoot. Most of them come back just fine, oblivious to the danger that this wilderness presents to anyone not adequately prepared. Some of them have to be brought out by search and rescue. Some of them just don't come back. A ranger or a random hiker might occasionally come across the deserted remains of a campsite and report it in. Those are the spooky ones, the ones where people just vanished and left behind a perfectly set-up campsite. No explanation, no clues, just a deserted clearing, often with perfectly intact tents and personal effects. But there are bears and mountain lions, along with a handful of lesser predators that roam these forests, and sometimes they get hungry enough to stalk and even kill humans. And that doesn't even take into consideration the much more likely scenario, folks stepping out of their tents at night to take a piss and very quickly getting lost. Most humans aren't suited to survival in the wilderness, unfortunately. My radio squawked again. Tower 9, what's the word? Yeah, I see it, Billy. Looks to be a couple of miles due north of my tower. What's your plan? He asked. I knew what he meant. Keep an eye on it and hope for the best, or take a trip over and investigate. After a brief pause, I sighed with resignation. It's probably just a campfire, but I guess I better head over and take a look to be sure. I didn't relish the thought of trekking to that area of wilderness, to be honest. It was the only area I hadn't explored during my time here. There weren't many trails heading in that direction, and the ones that did were badly overgrown and too narrow for the Jeep. A couple of miles hike might not seem like a lot, but when you're out here alone, the dense trees seem to stretch on forever. 2 miles can feel like 100. Roger that, John, Billy replied. Take your pack and your rifle. Check in periodically. Will do. Tower 9 out, I said, replacing the binoculars on their hook and shouldering the red canvas backpack waiting dutifully in the corner chair. I grabbed the rifle from its rack over the doorframe, checked to make sure it was loaded, and headed out. As I locked the gate behind me, I threw my pack in the back of the Jeep and set the rifle beside it. The Jeep wouldn't get me too far before the brush made the trail impassable, but if it saved me even half a mile of hiking, it was well worth it. The sun was still high in the sky. I had plenty of time to get there and back before dusk, as long as I didn't dawdle. I started the engine and turned the wheels toward the unmaintained trail to my right. After only a few moments, the trees and canopy obscured any trace of the watchtower behind me. I was actually able to push the Jeep farther than expected. A pleasant surprise. I was probably a mile along the trail before it bent, and a massive pine lay across the path, much too large to go over. The dense underbrush around me ruled out the possibility of going around. I immediately lamented not bringing the chainsaw. Cutting it up and winching the pieces out of the way wouldn't have been too difficult and would have saved me a ton of trouble. With a quiet curse, I stepped out of the Jeep and grabbed my gear from the back seat. I smiled to myself as a quote from a certain fictional adventure-seeking archaeologist suddenly came to mind. "We walk from here,